Dylan says, I can see bubble screens to TJ Moore and run ball at the middle with Maffa and deep pass to Jake Brittingstool and Antonio Williams. I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, TJ Moore absolutely is a guy that is electric with the ball in his hands. I think you're going to see Bryant Wesco involved in the spring game a lot. The screen game a lot. He did a lot of the.
He was involved in the spring game.
He was very involved in the spring game, so I wasn't technically wrong. But I think but it's already happened. But yeah, I think you'll see Bryant Wesco involved in the spring game. He was involved. I mean, when you watch his high school tape, like they did a lot to get him the ball in space. Like he's a really, really good electric player. I mean, he's not like he doesn't have elite speed, but he's elusive, makes guys miss, and he's for his size, he's really tough to tackle. I think you'll see Wesco involved in the screen game a lot. Obviously, I mean, Antonio Williams and Tyler Brown are guys they'll be involved there. Cole Turner. But yeah, I think the development of the vertical passing game, I think, is going to be the biggest story about how successful this offense is. I mean, if you're hitting the explosive plays, that opens everything up, and you have guys that can get down the field. Jake Brittingstool as a tight end can certainly give you a lot down the field as a receiving weapon. Really, just Adam Randall as a boundary guy. I mean, that's really all he did last year was run go routes. Like they didn't really have him do a whole ton else. And so I think he gives you that big physical boundary receiver, and if he obviously I think he trusts his body a lot more, and he was a big story in spring. And so if we see the Adam Randall we hope we were getting, that's just a plus. Do you have Troy Stellato who can do he really can do pretty much anything you need him to. He can get down the field. He's great with the ball in his hands. You can run him across the middle, drags, curls. He does a lot. Like he's a really great safety blanket to have in the flat. Like there's a lot you can do there. And then that's one of the reasons I'm so high on this, this receiving room is just because you have so many guys that can give you a lot of different stuff. And that's just something that Clemson hasn't had in a few years. And it's certainly a large reason why the offenses weren't nearly as successful. So, it's exciting. And you just, Lord willing, that the injury part, which has been the biggest plague to this room over the last couple of seasons, that doesn't come back to bite you. But you do also have more depth as well.
Really, since the 2021 season, we have yet to make it through a season without substantial injuries to that wide receiver room. So hopefully the tide will be turning for us this year. And we'll get a bit more of a healthy season out of that group. We've kind of covered those guys, at length on this show and on this channel, and how we feel about the group overall and the depth of that group. So I think we're in a really good place. I know most people around the country that are not Clemson fans are probably still saying, you can't name a single player on Clemson's wide receiver core. But if things go our way this year and we can get this offensive scheme and stuff established with Garrett Riley and get some things turned around, there'll be some names out there that are known on the national stage when it comes to Clemson wide receivers again.
Absolutely. There's a real positive possibility. We look back and you'll see end of year graphics and Clemson had one of the better wide receiver rooms in the country.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent, but again, you got to see it. I got to see it to believe it, right? We've been excited in years past coming into seasons, and the offense has underperformed pretty much since 2021. So hopefully we get it turned around and headed in the right direction this year, specifically on that side of the ball.
Yeah. And I'm probably, maybe I'm probably more on the extreme here because I know there's a lot of apprehension, um, and for good reason about this room, but I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I just and the more I've sat on it, the more I really love what this group can be this year, and so
Well, I think, and
uh,
I
that's where
understand where you're at with that, Jordan,
yeah,
because I think one of the biggest, I guess, insurance policies that you have if you're looking at Clemson's roster as a Clemson fan and you're kind of hoping for the best for this upcoming season and kind of the explosiveness of this offense to turn around is the various different types of body types that you have in that room now. They don't all look the same like they did at one point in time. And then the sheer depth that you have there. So, if injuries do happen again this season, which, feels inevitable at this point in our wide receiver room, you have that depth, I think, to endure some injuries in that group and still be really talented and have big contributors, regardless of what happens there. So I think there's a little more reasons to be optimistic just because of the depth that is in that room. And surprisingly enough, none of those guys left via the transfer portal,
yeah.
which I thought was a real possibility heading out of spring practice. We talked about it, and that did not happen. So, um, I think there's some reasonable optimism heading into the season for that group. But again, it's gotta produce on the field, right? It's
Yeah.
gotta
Well,
happen.
and at the end of the day, they're not going to reach their potential if Cade can't get them the ball. That's
There
the
you go.
reality. Like
Absolutely.
and so like that's something that I should have made clear. But I love this room, and I think they would be successful. Like basically, I think this group would be good like basically anywhere. But you still have to. I mean, you still have to have the quarterback play. You still have to be able to throw them the ball and on time and get them the ball in their hands, and that's where the excitement is kind of you have to rein it back a little bit because it's like, well, at the end of the day, Cade is still an unknown as far as what we're going to get out of him this year. I I think he'll be better than last year. How much better? And has he gotten enough better to where this offense is running at the clip that we all thought it would last season?
Yeah, absolutely. But
Absolutely. All right. I see some people talking about Jeff Scott. Yeah. I mean, wide receiver has been an issue since Scott left for USA. Yeah. I mean, to a degree. I mean, wide receiver certainly is, the fall of
yeah,
the wide receiver room certainly, happened when around the time when Jeff Scott left. But, I think part of that was because his last class was just not particularly good. That didn't help. And 2020 happened, and you still had the remnants of the last really good wide receiver classes. I mean, obviously you had Amari Rodgers and Cornell Powell doing a lot of the heavy lifting in that wide receiver room, and there was still excitement about Joseph Ngata and Frank Ladson, but couldn't stay healthy, which is obviously a trend that would
yeah. I mean, look,
continue in the latter years. And then, I mean, EJ Williams flashed. We thought, oh man, next Justin Ross, even went to the same high school. Like
yeah,
this is perfect. And speaking of Justin Ross, obviously the devastating neck condition and
man,
surgery
yeah,
just it permanently altered him in his career. And so you have all of those things. You have a wide receiver class that just couldn't stay healthy, and then the two big guys couldn't stay healthy, and then the rest just did not pan out. And then your best receiver, didn't play for a full season and came
yeah,
back, 50% of himself, and he played
yeah,
with a broken foot for most of the year.
yeah,
And you just never got any consistency. And because, you add the issues that DJ had as a starter in 2021, and all the injuries that piled on that season, like all of those things happened at within like a 2-year span. You have your wide receiver coach leave, and his class that he brought in didn't pan out. They couldn't stay healthy. Your quarterback has his own issues that doubly hurt the offense. The offensive line, I didn't even mention all of that. So much happened at one particular time, and
Right.
of course you have COVID, which impacted your recruiting and your evaluations. All of that just really, I think, was crippling in a lot of ways to Clemson's offensive, success. Their and the wide receivers and offensive line in particular, I think, were just it just was not. They weren't able to recover, and you had a lot of misses. You had a lot of guys get injured, and that in turn hurt your quarterback play. And you developed a reputation. You lost the pedigree that you once had from an offensive standpoint. It just it really was just a nightmare scenario when you look back at it in the totality.
Yeah,
Of
a lot happened,
a lot
and
happened.
you explained it really well. And I know the popular opinion with some Clemson fans is when Jeff Scott left, the wide receiver core kind of fell apart. And timeline wise, that does kind of work out. But let's not forget that those were his guys still in the room.
Yeah.
And you kind of laid it out. They did not work out. We started to have almost zero diversity in body type because of recruiting. So I think that was a problem. But I think the recruiting has started to turn around in the wide receiver room. We're starting to get that diversity and body type back. We got those smaller, quick twitch guys that can, obviously perform in the screen game and across the middle and things like that. Those speedy guys. We got the big physical guys outside now. We just need them to put it together on the field. I think our wide receiver room is still a work in progress when it comes to producing on the field, but I think the talent is there, right? And we'll see. I know a lot of people point to wide receiver coach as maybe they think Dabo needs to make a change there, and I think that's still to be determined. Obviously, I think this year is a huge year for that, right? If you can't produce with this wide receiver group, maybe it is time to reevaluate that and see where we're at the end of the season, right? But right now, we're locked in with who we have. I think we have great talent on the roster, and I can't wait to see what this wide receiver room is able to put on the field this year. Jeff Scott's obviously back in Clemson. He's not coaching. He's not looking to coach right now. If he was, he'd probably have something be back with the program in some form or fashion or some capacity. He would be back with the program, but he's not. He's chilling. He's collecting that money from USF still. He's probably getting some much needed family time. And if he wants to get back in coaching, it'll be on his timeline. So for right now, Jeff Scott is not an option. So I know there's a lot of fans out there that want him super bad, but he's made it clear. He's gone on interviews and he's made it clear that he is not interested in getting back into coaching, at least right now. I'm sure that'll change in the future. He's still a young guy, still got a lot of coaching in front of him, but right now he's not interested.
Absolutely. And PJ just asked, who doesn't miss on recruits? I mean, everybody misses on recruits, and that's not what we're saying. It's not like, oh, okay, you missed on a couple of guys here or there. It was an entire class of wide receivers, really almost two full classes of wide receivers that never panned out. I mean,
Yeah.
you go back to the 2019 class. You had Joseph Ngata. I mean, I have to look because my memory, I don't have these guys off my memory. But Joseph Ngata was in that class. Frank Ladson was in that class. Neither one panned out. I mean, Joseph Ngata was fine, but never, was never consistent. Could never stay healthy, and just never became what we all thought he was. Coming in. Frank Ladson, we know what happened to him. Couldn't stay healthy. Transfers out, and I want to point this out because, like,
Yeah. Thank you.
Because some people are going to want to say that, okay, well, maybe these guys aren't panning out because Jeff Scott wasn't there and Tyler Grisham just didn't coach them up well.
Lack of development. Yeah.
You could see, I mean, you could make that argument,
right?
But then when you look at where these guys ended up and where, especially the guys that transferred out, there hasn't been a single one of those final Jeff Scott recruits that transferred and panned out and did anything.
Nope.
None of them. Frank Ladson was basically a non-factor for most of his time at Miami. I think, is he still on the roster?
I
think he might. Does he have a year of eligibility? I know he was on it last year. He hardly played.
Yeah, he was there last year. I don't know if he's still this year or I have no idea, honestly.
I don't. Yeah, I'm not even sure. EJ Williams, bench warmer at Indiana.
Yeah.
I don't even. I want to put that in perspective, and this is not to slant, to bash these particular players, but I want to put into perspective, you can tell when these guys transfer out and they're non-factors elsewhere that, quite frankly, it has more to do with them than the people coaching them. You guys remember Ajo?
Yeah.
I mean, I think he had a touchdown this past week in the Canadian Football League or something. So that'd be great for him, but didn't have much of a college career. He followed Jeff Scott down to USF, non-factor. Hardly played. Dakari Collins. Well, and he wasn't even really a Jeff Scott recruit, so that's probably not fair. But he's still one of those wide receivers that haven't panned out. Now we'll see. His career's not over, and they're expecting him to take on a bigger role in NC State. But there's so much that about those latter classes that wasn't all just Tyler Grisham not being a good coach. And it's a lot of fans wanted to say at that point. And I understand that sentiment, especially during the time. It was why are our wide receivers why do they suck now?
Because we went from just churning out these elite level wide receivers to what the heck happened to Clemson and their wide receiver core, right? So I get the sentiment, and it's never all one thing or all the other thing, right? There was a combination of things that you kind of laid out earlier that happened, right? It's not Jeff Scott's fault that these guys didn't pan out, right? They just sometimes you just miss on guys. It is what it is. He's clearly a good evaluator and a good recruiter. Look at all the guys that he brought in before these guys that didn't pan out, right? And maybe there is a learning curve with Tyler Grisham, and he wasn't developing guys to the level that he should be developing guys, right? Maybe he's still not. That's yet to be seen. That's yet to be fully determined, right? So there's a lot of factors that go into this of guys not panning out, Jeff Scott leaving, injuries, Tyler Grisham probably doing a little bit of learning on the job, right? Not necessarily having his processes down pat for being a wide receiver coach yet. Remember, just because you played a position doesn't mean you can coach that position. So there is a lot of that.
Especially not right away. I mean, there's a learning curve.
It takes learning. It takes, being able to relate to these guys and explain it in a way that makes sense and understands to them. And then you have to be able to get buy-in from those guys, right? So I'm not saying that Tyler Grisham is or isn't a good coach. I'm saying this is kind of his year to kind of prove it, in my opinion, with this group of guys. And if the production doesn't significantly increase, then maybe it's something that you need to reevaluate come off season, right? But a lot of factors that you laid out very well, Jordan, went into kind of where we sit right now as the wide receiver situation at Clemson.
And Pete Anderson, I think I'm trying to slander Jeff Scott. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying his last class just wasn't good, and that contributed to why the wide receiver room fell off. I'm not blaming Jeff Scott. I'm just saying that's just the reality of what it is. I would love to have Jeff Scott back in some form or fashion, because not only was he a good wide, I mean, even if he's not the wide receiver coach, he was a phenomenal recruiter. And he was a reason you landed more than just the wide receivers you got. He was like, he sold Clemson better than anybody not named Dabo Sweet.
We can bring him back, and if he doesn't want to do on-field coaching, hey, just make that guy your recruiting coordinator, man.
Yeah,
and he can just focus on recruiting, and I'd be 100% okay with that. That dude can identify talent. He can recruit like none other. So yeah, you're not getting no Jeff Scott sucks for me. No, he's a great coach. He's a really good coach. Didn't pan out for him at South Florida, but that is what it is. I could care less what he does as a head coach. I hope he comes back with Clemson in some capacity eventually, but he's just made it clear recently that, or not recently, but once he came back to Clemson, a lot of people thought that, he's going to be right back with the staff. And, for whatever reason, that's just not what he wanted. He wanted to take a break. He wanted to, relax and be with family. And, I'm sure it's not easy being a head coach somewhere where things are not going your way, and the stress of that, of you going somewhere and your program failing, and, the stress that puts on your family, I get it. You want to take some time away from the game. You want to be with your family. But, I, for one, hope that he does get back with Clemson in some capacity, whatever that is at the time.
P Digit says, I can't stand Jeff Scott now after this episode. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, that's all right, Pete. He's giving me a hard time, I guess. John asks, did Dominic Thomas ever get a new spot? Yeah, he's at Ole Miss now.
Yeah, he went to Ole Miss. That's going to be interesting.
John piling on. Good to see you, man. He says, Jeff Scott isn't that good.
No, definitely not, John. Definitely not.
Yeah, I'm gonna start leaning into it. We're gonna rename the show "Jeff Scott Sucks" live.